Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Last week, obviously, we went nearly an hour and a half just talking about free agency. But of course, the other big thing that happened in the past couple of weeks for the Kraken was the draft. And now we also have Dev Camp to go along with it. So I'm really stoked to talk about that. But in addition to all that fun stuff regarding all of the future of the Kraken, we've also had some big Kraken news. That includes the hiring of the assistant coaches that we were waiting for and the new head coach in Coachella Valley. So this podcast probably end up going a little long again, but it's all good stuff, and I'm really excited to talk with you, RJ, about it, get your opinions on some of this stuff, just have fun talking about the Kraken. But first, of course, we got to talk about Queen Anne Beer Hall, our wonderful sponsor, and RJ, they have a new burger of the month.
I know, this is my favorite time. We get to announce a new burger of the month. It is July, Dylan, and so the burger of the month for July is the pulled pork smash. They got the OG smash patty on there, American cheese, burger sauce, and their burger sauce is really good. Pulled pork, Woodinville whiskey barbecue sauce. And yes, that is made with Woodinville whiskey. I know they love to get the local breweries, distilleries involved. And then pickled jalapeno. I'm not done yet. Pickled jalapeno, crispy onions on a pretzel bun. So I know that's a lot to take in, but that is an awesome burger of the month. I can't wait to try that one.
Yeah, that one sounds pretty good.
What's your take on pretzel bun, Dylan? Yes or no?
I don't know. I don't eat burgers. I don't.
All right, fair enough.
I only ever eat the bun. It's a pretzel bun. I like that.
Well, I know you eat pretzels, so
yeah, it's like a pretzel, so I like that. It's kind of like more like an aerated pretzel, a little bit more of the inside of the pretzel. I'm always down for that. That's my favorite part. So,
okay, I will not try and get any more food takes out of you, Dylan. Sorry.
You should know better by now. You've only known me like 16 years. All right, let's start with the big Kraken news. That was that the Kraken have found their assistant coaches for Coach Dan Bylsma's staff, and that includes Jess Campbell becoming the first ever female assistant coach in the National Hockey League, and then our boy, oh my gosh, Bob Woods. There we go.
You got it, Dylan. You got it, Dylan. Yes, but Jess Campbell and Bob Woods joining Dan Bylsma's coaching staff. Dave Lowry staying on staff as well. I think we mentioned that last week as Francis announced that. And so that rounds out the entire coaching staff. Also, Steve Briere, the goalie coach, staying on. Thank goodness. He's done great work with the goalies. And there was a funny moment, too. I loved when Bylsma in the presser, remember when he was going over the assistant coaches and talking about great things about them. He said, Steve, and then a long pause. And then finally said something about him. They like to joke around.
He's giving him a lot of grief. Is there more history there that I don't know about?
I don't think so. Again, he just likes to joke around with everybody, though. You saw it all last season, right? Whether it was the goalies or the other coaches, he's just a funny guy.
Well, I could tell you this, because when I was in LA for that last game in LA for the Kraken last season, and I've talked about this. Coach Dan was there, watching Shane Riker and everything. Briere was up there in the press bridge with Dan, and they were having a pretty good time, it looked like. So they're on the same page.
For sure.
But RJ, what about these coaching hires? Because we were able to not only know that these are going to be the assistant coaches, but also we got information on what everybody's responsibilities would be.
That's right. So as far as responsibilities, Dave Lowry, it sounds like he's going to have a little bit more responsibility on this coaching staff. He was just kind of a rover last year, but he's going to be in charge of the PK this year as well. And then there is Bob Woods, who is in charge of the defenseman, but also will be kind of mainly running the power play. But Jess Campbell is also going to help him with the power play as well. So the two of them are going to work together on that. And then, those are the responsibilities for the coaching staff. Remind me about the forwards again. Who's coaching the forwards? Is that going to be Lowry?
Yeah, it was Lowry. And
okay.
Yeah. So, and that's, I think, one of the things that I wanted to get into was also kind of the specifics around each person. I don't know if we want to start with Jess. I know obviously a lot of people are excited about that. Obviously, Kraken fans very familiar with Jess Campbell's work with the Firebirds, being a part of Coach Dan's staff down there. And maybe people, expecting her, if she was going to join the staff, to maybe be in charge of some of that stuff or the power play. but it sounds like, and this is, I'm going to launch into like a longer thing here, everybody, so just bear with me. It sounds like the main reason they brought her in was for her like power skating experience and coaching experience there. And it seems like, to me, looking at the coaching hires that they have here, including the addition of Jess Campbell, looking at the way the draft went, and we'll get to that later, looking at the free agent signings that the Kraken made in Montour and Chandler Stevenson, it's clear to me that this offseason, we knew the Kraken needed to have a plan, and there wasn't really one last year. We talked a lot about that. It seems to me like the organizational philosophy and plan is now in place, and that is that they want to be a team that can skate. They want to be a team that can attack and transition, which is something you and I have been talking about all playoff long, because those are the teams that are successful in the playoffs for the last several years. And it just seems like that is the direction that they want to build this organization from top to bottom. And so I look at, and again, we'll talk about this more draft wise there. You look at the Chandler Stevenson, Brandon Montour signings. What's the one thing that Ron Francis said about them? They can skate, right? Everybody knows that about those two guys. They are good skaters. They can skate. It looks like they want to make the roster more in that kind of image, maybe make it look a little bit more like, whether it was Florida, Edmonton, Vegas is obviously like kind of the textbook example of attacking in transition. The Kraken want to move in that direction. They want to draft guys that are good at that. They want to develop guys that are good at that. And they wanted to bring in a person like Jess Campbell to work with the veterans already on the Kraken roster to make them like that. And that's kind of reading between the lines at the press conference, RJ, from listening to Dan talk about Jess, Ron talk about Jess talking about what she's excited for and what she's looking forward to doing with the Kraken. It seems like Jess is there, and obviously, I mean, she was probably the best person on the planet for this job, to make this team a better skating team so that they can attack in transition. They can play a more north-south game, which fits Coach Dan's philosophy and kind of style with the Firebirds. And she's going to be there to really, just up that agility, mobility factor of this roster.
Right. And I'm glad you brought this up on the podcast, because when you brought it up to me first, it just clicked for me, right? Where it was right after we had listened to that press conference where it was with Dan, with Jess, with Bob. And I was talking to you and I said that it was a little confusing to me because we both thought that the best fit, I think we said this on the podcast earlier, like a few weeks ago, we thought the best fit for Jess might be as a head coach in Coachella Valley, and that would be the best spot for her. And I was saying that again to you. I said, I wonder why they went with her as an assistant. And you're like, no. I see the vision now. I see what they're going for. They're going for this transition, power skating kind of thing, and they need Jess up here to do that. And it all just makes so much sense in the context of the signings, that the players that they brought in who are known for speed and everything that you just mentioned. So I think that's a fantastic insight there. It seems like that's the way they're going. And that is the way, as you said, to win in the NHL and to get the most out of a roster that, I mean, let's be honest, Dan's going to have to get the most out of that roster. They are going to have to get the most out of this team. All the models, everything say that this is a playoff bubble team. And so making sure to play the right way and getting the most out of that group is what's going to be the difference between making it and not.
Yeah, exactly. And again, who better to do that than Jess Campbell, who has, prior to her Firebirds experience and kind of coaching in Europe, was a power skating coach who worked with NHLers, right? Who it was, hearing her talk at the press conference, it was the demand she was getting from NHL players to work with her on skating that kind of led her to pursue coaching and think that she could do that, and ends up coaching in Europe, and now ultimately ends up at the NHL level. But it just speaks to her skill at understanding the mechanics of it, understanding by communicating and building that kind of coaching relationship with a player, that she's able to see what they need, hear what they need, notice the things that they're not doing well, work with them one-on-one, because that's what she started off doing. And then we obviously know that she's been doing that in Coachella Valley with a lot of guys too, because they've talked about it as they've come up to the Kraken. She's so good at identifying what aspects of skating guys need to work on, and then giving them the perfect plan so that they not only end up working on those things, developing those skills, ending up better players, but they do it so fast. Like, she in single off seasons is able to like turn around NHL players skating from like fundamentals on up. She was able to do that with guys like Ty Cartier, Logan Morrison, right? Ryan Winterton, all of these guys that have come through Coachella Valley. Riker Evans has talked about it. Like everybody who has worked with her, she has a way of identifying those things, communicating what they need to work on, coaching them through working on it, and then having them become a better skater in like the span of a couple months. And that to me is really, really impressive, because if you're anybody who has coached or even taught in anything, that is not something that is just like natural and easy to do, right? Like it may be for her, but it is not for most people. And so I'm really excited about that, because I think it's one of those things that when you're talking about kind of redoing a roster and an organizational philosophy the way the Kraken are, that's not a quick fix. That's not an off-season fix. That's not something that's going to play out come October when the season starts. But it's something that's, year 2, 3, you would normally start seeing dividends. But I think maybe halfway through this season, we start seeing the team maybe start gelling a little bit more. And some of that will just be everybody getting used to the new systems in place. But I could also see maybe some of it just being Jess working with these guys and getting them to be better skaters just halfway through a season, because she's shown she can do that with the Firebirds already.
Right. She's shown that with the Firebirds. She's shown that really throughout her whole career. And I think that's probably the biggest reason that she is where she is right now, is just that special ability to work with players, especially one-on-one too, and increase their skills. And I mean, there's a reason, like when Dan brought her in, that she had these great reviews from NHL players already she was working with. Brent Seabrook, I think most notably, where, I mean, the glowing words from him, and also the other words, right? I mean, there was a great question from our buddy Glenn Dreyfus with Davy Jones' locker room, where he was asking he brought up a quote from Brent Seabrook about saying how much he hated her because she could do all the things that he could do, and she could do it, anything that she asked him to do, and he said, "Are you looking forward to the Kraken players hating you?" And I love his questions like that. But she said, "Well, I guess if it's for the same reason as Brent, then yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to it." And so that's the kind of relationship that she can build with players and help them on their skills. And she mentioned too, she said, "I'm a big believer in communication and showing compassion for the players, especially when it gets hard." And I think this season, especially with the new systems, with everything, there are going to be moments when it gets hard, but she's going to be able to help guide them through that and get the best out of them.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about bringing her in. Again, you and I were both kind of more so on board with keeping her in Coachella Valley, having her maybe assume the head coaching gig there. But like I said, once like the draft surprise kind of happened, once free agency kind of happened, and then seeing her and hearing what they had to say in the press conference, it all kind of clicked for me, and kind of what the Kraken are trying to do here. And Jess, I think, is going to be very pivotal in the success of being able to do that and turn this team into a more transitional attacking style skating team. And like I said, I can't think of a better person for the job. So really happy to have Jess on board there with the Kraken. We can transition over into talking about Bob Woods now, unless you have anything else to say about Jess Campbell.
No, I think, and I'm kind of glad we covered this the way that we did, because I know the story, especially for a lot of news outlets that don't always cover the Kraken, where it's kind of gone up to national news and everything, is that she's the first female assistant coach. And I know that's the part of the story that kind of gets picked up a lot. But if you talk to Jess, she's never really wanted that to be the story, right? She's always been focused on the day-to-day and just doing her job well. And so I think that's what it's really about. And so it is great that she is there and that other people can see that, look, this is possible and this can be done. But I think it is worth mentioning that, for her, it's just about doing her job really well. And I think everybody in the organization has, I mean, look, if you're paying attention at all, you know that she's here, not at all because she's a woman, because she's really good at her job. Yes. And so I just think that's worth mentioning before we move on. If you've been paying attention, it shouldn't be needed to be mentioned, right? But yeah. I think we should just say that one more time.
Yeah, and the Kraken, they weren't leaning into it at all. I know it got picked up by big outlets and everything. And there is an element of that is important, right? And she did talk about that. Like, it is important for people like her to kind of break these barriers, to show young women, young girls that, this stuff is possible, all of that kind of stuff. Like, there is an element of it that is really important. Not trying to downplay any of that at all. But at the same time, we're here to talk about the Kraken and analyze the Kraken. And we talked about what she's going to do for the Kraken. And that's what matters most here on this podcast. With Bob Woods coming in, right? The big thing that everybody was talking about with him, whether it was the press release that the Kraken released, whether it was what Coach Dan had to say about adding him to the staff, Ron Francis about adding him to the staff. The big thing that everybody seems to be hitting on with him coming in is his ability, similar to Jess, to work with players one-on-one, to develop that relationship with them, and then develop them into better hockey players, with Bob specifically defensemen. And you look at the list that everybody kept repeating of all of the great young defensemen that he has worked with early on in their NHL careers, and has helped achieve many big things at the NHL level. And it's a pretty impressive list, right? Whether it's like John Carlson, Hampus Lindholm, Brock Faber, most recently in Minnesota. It's a really, really impressive list in what he's been able to do. And I think this is the other part of now my other spiel about what the Kraken were kind of going for. I think this offseason was, I think the word that was most used in that kind of large press conference for the assistant coaches, where we heard from Coach Dan, Ron Francis, Bob Woods, and Jess Campbell, all of them, the most used word was relationships. And I think so, like on ice, the Kraken have their plan. They want to be a transitional attacking team. That's the kind of team they want to be. I think off ice, their plan and new organizational philosophy and culture that they want to build is one on personal relationships. Everybody having a relationship with each other, everybody having on the coaching staff and in the front office, having relationships with the players so that they're able to, just kind of have that culture, that more, I guess, family. Nobody used the word family, but when you think about having those kinds of more personal relationships, that's the kind of that next conclusion, right, that you can draw. But having that style and having that become the culture for the Seattle Kraken, and I think that that's going to be really important moving forward too. And I think Bob Woods and the hiring of him is kind of big on that too, just because, like I said, the thing everybody keeps hammering home about him is his ability to build a personal relationship with defensemen and then help them develop through that relationship. And I think that that's something that we have never really heard from the Kraken before. I wouldn't really describe the last coaching staff as one that it seemed like, building those relationships was kind of their style. But it feels very much like that is going to be the style of the Seattle Kraken and the coaching staff under Dan Bylsma.
Right. And under the last staff, I think the door was always open. It wasn't kind of a separation between the players and the coaches. And the door was always open if you want to talk. But I don't think there was that effort to go and build that relationship and kind of be proactive about it. Whereas I think that's going to be a big change, under Bylsma and Campbell and Woods and all of them kind of having the relationships with the players that's going to benefit them a lot. And I think also just making it a fun environment to play. I mean, we saw this with the goaltending, I think, from year 1 to year 2, where Steve Briere, he made it fun for the goalies to go out and do what they did. And we heard this from Joey Daccord, from Philip Grubauer, from all the goalies that worked with him, right? They were just having a blast going out there, day to day. It didn't feel like a grind, right? And I think you're going to see that now for the skaters with the rest of the coaching staff. I think about somebody asked Bob Woods about coaching under Dan previously, because they had spent, a year together in Buffalo. And that wasn't the best. That year didn't go the best for them really on the team. But he said he's a guy, talking about Dan, he's a guy that makes it fun. You come to the rink, it's not a grind. He's like, well, you're grinding, but you're having fun doing it. And I think that's going to be a big change this year. Yeah.
And I think about them having, Riker Evans getting ready for his first full professional season at the NHL level. And then I think about bringing in a guy like Bob Woods, and it's like, that makes a lot of sense. I would love to see Riker's name kind of added to that pretty prestigious list of defensemen. And the list is longer than the 3 guys I mentioned. I mean, you can go through like Jared Spurgeon, all these guys that he's worked with. I would love to see Riker Evans' name kind of added to that group. And, it seems like, I mean, just watching Riker Evans last year, I think he has a good chance of joining that group.
Definitely. And he has the track now too. Cause I mean, one thing we didn't really mention, I think we could probably just shoehorn it in here news wise, right? Is because last week we were discussing, okay, well, they've got 7D now here. Is Riker on the outside looking in? This could potentially be a problem. We don't want to see him sat anymore. But Ron Francis took care of that, trading away Brian Dumoulin to the Anaheim Ducks, bringing in Josh Mahura on a 1-year deal as a 7th defenseman. I think that's probably what he's going to be, but that clears the spot for Riker Evans. There is a very clear top 6 now in Dunn, Larson, Alexiak, Montour, Riker, and Borgen. Those are the top 6 defensemen, in whatever order, but those are the top 6. Mahura and probably Cale Fleury are going to be competing for the 7th spot. But the most important part of all of that is it just clears the path for Riker Evans. He is going to be a full-time regular defenseman on that blue line. We will not see him in the press box. I don't think pretty much at all this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. Looking at the other stuff with Bob Woods, I mean, him taking over the power play is interesting. I think that's going to be an interesting look. You don't tend to think of, defensive coaches as being in charge of the power play. I know Jess Campbell is going to be assisting him on the power play, but everybody kind of made it pretty clear that it was going to be Bob's, in charge of the power play and stuff. I do wonder about that kind of perspective coming in, a little bit of a different perspective, especially in an NHL where power plays becoming a little stale. Everybody's running a 3-1-3. I've talked about this before. I hate it, but it's what's here right now. I do wonder about Bob maybe having slightly different ideas, just given his coaching background.
Yeah, I do wonder about that, and especially having 2 people kind of collaborate on it too. I think it's the perfect spot for Jess too, because I know she was running the power play in Coachella Valley, but as we've talked about, her real strength is focusing on the skating and focusing on that individual player coaching. I think she's more of a like a developer rather than a tactician, but she can do both. But I think that's really kind of her strength. And so being able to work with Bob, and we'll see what kind of looks they look at. I mean, one question that I got in the Armchair GM stream that I want to ask you, because he has that experience with defensemen, because the Kraken have honestly now 3 defensemen who can all run a power play, and Vince Dunn, Brandon Montour, and Riker Evans. Would you have 2 of them together on a power play unit? Do you think that's something that Woods looks at? I see the reaction on your face, Dylan. I know this is not what you would normally go for, but I don't know. Is it maybe Brandon Montour is a little different? What do you think?
Well, that is my gut instinct, and it's that I wouldn't hate it, at least for like the first unit power play. You could do it, but it only works because Montour will essentially not be a defenseman out there. Montour, and we talked about this last week when we talked about some of the stuff that I really like about Brandon Montour is his ability to be that kind of roaming rover, whatever you want to call it. And his player movement. And I said on the power play, he's going to force player movement. Whether whoever is in charge of the power play wants there to be player movement or not, Brandon Montour will force player movement because he moves too much. And so I do think that you can, well, not too much, but he moves enough that other guys will have to move in relation to what he's doing. And so in that sense, I think it could work just because Brandon Montour can kind of just do his thing, and you could have Vince Dunn man the point, and then it really frees up Brandon Montour to do what he wasn't necessarily able to do, say, in the Stanley Cup final when he ended up getting taken off that power play, right? If you give him that little bit of extra freedom where he doesn't have to worry about also being the guy back and being that last line of defense if things go south, I mean, I can't even imagine what he could come up with if he doesn't have to worry about that. So I personally, gut reaction off the cuff, I think that you could be in for something fun there just because of this new personnel you have. And then that way you're also getting all 3 guys having power play time, right? Vince Dunn, we know, has made great strides on the power play. I still think he has a ways to go on the power play. He'd still be getting power play time. Riker Evans, guy worthy of getting some power play time at the NHL level, developing those skills. And really with Vince Dunn and Brandon Montour, if you stick with the traditional 1 defenseman approach, I don't know that Riker Evans will really ever get that NHL level power play time where he can develop to become a power play quarterback in his own right, just given the contracts that those guys have and the skill that they have and the veteran experience they have. So for all of those reasons, I would definitely be open to one of the power play units running 2 defensemen.
Right. The more I think about it, the more I like it. And you're right. With the contract situation, this is not temporary. This is 3 years that you have Dunn and Montour both under contract, Montour for even longer. How long are you going to keep Riker Evans off of a power play unit? But the last reason that I like it too is you look at the forward. Like, else are you keeping off the ice? Chandler Stevenson, Andre Burakovsky? I mean, yeah, and there's 2 power play units. Like, they're all going to get their time. But you look at last year, and they were struggling for who to put on the power play. I mean, Yanni Gord was getting some power play time. Like, you guys that maybe probably shouldn't be on those units. So I think if you have both defensemen there, you're probably keeping a forward off the ice who, is not really a difference maker given what the roster is. So I don't really mind the trade-off there. It's not like you have a bunch of stars you're taking off the ice. So I wouldn't mind it personally. I would love to see Montour just unleashed. Like, especially if you have Dunn running the point, just say, hey, do whatever you want, be creative, go out there, do your thing, and just let the other people read off you and adapt to you.
Yeah. So there you go. Coach Woods, do it. Go for it. Got the ECH seal of approval.
Sure. Yes, that is what matters more than anything, right?
Exactly. Anything else on the Kraken assistant coaching press conference, the assistant coaches themselves, Coach Dan's staff? I kind of talked about my thoughts on what it means kind of for the organization at a larger level. I don't know if you have anything before we move on.
No, I think you made it clear to me when you said that you see the vision. And I think as you pointed out to me, now I think I see the vision, and it just has to come together over training camp. And I mean, that's the number one thing, right? Training camp. There's going to be so much that's sorted out. I mean, whether it's the power play stuff, whether it's kind of drills they're running, the skating, all of that, it's going to be a very, very fun training camp for us to keep a close lens on.
Yes. I'm excited for it a lot. And it'll be the first training camp I'll be able to go to. So
yes, we will need you up there. That is for sure.
Yeah, that's fun too. With the news that there was the Kraken had found their assistant coaches, all eyes then turned to Coachella Valley on who was going to end up being the head coach there. Obviously, in our minds, Jess Campbell was maybe a forerunner for it. Would Stu Bickel end up with that spot? We got our answer on the final day of Dev Camp, RJ, and that answer is that Derek Laxdal will be the head coach of the Coachella Valley Firebirds. It kind of dropped while we were like finishing up the ECH meetup outside. Everybody was hot and tired at that point. But as I was looking through his resume, and at first, obviously, Laxdal, like Hackstall, the comparisons were there. I know my girlfriend was just like, is that Dave Hackstall like in a mustache? Like, what are you doing? I was like, okay, no. And then I was like, I know that name. And it's like, I know that name. So on the light rail back, I was like, I know that name. And I pulled up his coaching history, and I went, oh, now I know why I know that name. Because back when I was with the Portland Winterhawks, and the early parts of me being with the Winterhawks was at the time when the Portland Winterhawks and the Edmonton Oil Kings were duking it out every year in the finals, the WHL final, every year, 3 straight years it was this. And I was like, oh, that's why I know that name, because he was coaching the Edmonton Oil Kings, who ended up kind of coming out on top in more of those matchups than I'd care to talk about.
Yeah. Are you at this point, are you willing to let bygones be bygones here? Keep an open mind toward your team's former nemesis?
Hey, look, it means one thing. I'm familiar with his game, and his game is good. So
I guess that's a good sign, right?
Good for the Kraken, yeah. And it's good for the Firebirds and the Kraken organization. In addition to kind of that, because that was his first stint as a major junior coach. He then went from that Edmonton Oil Kings job to be the head coach of the Texas Stars, which is the Dallas Stars AHL affiliate. So he was coaching at the AHL level. He did that job for 5 years, had some success, took them to an AHL final where they lost in the Calder Cup final, something unfortunately the Firebirds are fairly familiar with. And then from there, he was promoted and became an assistant coach with the Dallas Stars for 3 seasons before his most recent job, which was being the head coach of the Oshawa Generals in the OHL, where he just took them this past season to the OHL finals. So I mean, just based off of me reading that resume briefly, should give a lot of Firebirds fans and Kraken fans a kind of a good idea that, hey, look, this guy's a winner. Like all these different levels, coaching young players, developing young players, he turns them into winners. And I know that was important for the Firebirds to kind of continue the legacy that Coach Dan Bylsma and his staff had put together there. And I think that they found a good guy for that.
Yeah, it's a heck of a resume, and especially developing young players. Probably the most recent example would be Beckett Seneca, who nobody really expected to go third overall, least of all him. I mean, when we talk about the draft, we could mention that, right? But he was with the Oshawa Generals, and so that's a big part of developing a player, right? Derek Laxdal, I mean, instrumental in Beckett Seneca being third overall, and so he's going to be a good developer, I think, with the Firebirds, given that they're going to have a lot more younger players coming up into the organization.
Yeah, and Callum Ritchie becoming a first-round pick last year, Ben Danford, another first-round pick this year from the Oshawa Generals. You go back to his time with the Texas Stars. He was instrumental in Rupe Hintz coming over to North America and learning the North American game and getting ready to go do what he's now done for the Dallas Stars for years. So he has a very good track record of developing young players, getting the most out of them, I think is the big thing, because it's just you're looking at all three of these coaching stints that he's had, these last three coaching stints, whether it was with Edmonton 10 plus years ago, Texas for all the years he was there, or now with the Oshawa Generals. There's playoff success there, right? You're going to championships. All of them have gone to a championship. Well, only some of them have won, but all of them have gone to a championship. And even before that, when he was coaching in the ECHL, he won a championship there, and then had another finals appearance as well with the Idaho Steelheads. The guy just wins. Like at the end of the day, the guy wins. Doesn't matter the level, but when you kind of dig deeper into it, you look at the rosters he's had, the players he's been able to work with. He's really, really a good coach for this style of this situation, I should say, especially with the Firebirds roster having as much turnover as it's going to have. We've talked about this in the past, right? They're bringing back Max McCormick, bringing back John Hayden, probably, although John Hayden's going to have a chance to compete for a Kraken roster spot. They made the signings that they did last week, but really the meat of this roster for the first time is going to be Kraken draft picks that have graduated from the junior ranks. They're going to be there. Guys like David Goyette, guys like Jagger Firkus, guys like Yanni Newman, Nicholas Coco in net, right? A lot of these players, Ty Nelson on D, they're all going to be there kind of for the first time. You're going to have them experiencing men's professional hockey. And I think he's a really, really good coach to have there for that because of his experience working with junior players, because of his experience at the AHL level already. I think he's going to be a good guy to help kind of shepherd them through that.
Right. I think you're seeing the emphasis on development from the organization. If you're not going to have Jess there running things, because I think that would have been a great option as well. Yeah. You want somebody with that proven track record there. I think we should just talk about, too, the rest of the coaching staff and responsibilities, too, like we did for the NHL staff. So this is per Shad Powers, who got the scoop on this. So assistant coaches Stu Bickle and Colin Zulianello will remain with the organization. So Stu Bickle was an assistant there under Dan Bylsma. He's going to continue to run the defense and the PK. And then, of course, Colin Zulianello is the goalie coach, so he will stay on as the goalie coach. But one thing that's interesting, I don't know if they're bringing somebody else on, but Derek Laxdal is known for running a power play and running his own power play. So that was Jess Campbell's job in Coachella Valley. But with Laxdal, it sounds like they might not need to bring in somebody to replace that.
Hey, 2 for 1. Who could argue with that?
Yeah, good value, right?
Yeah, why pay 2 coaches when you could pay for 1? I'm sure is something that Ron Francis would say to that question. But yeah, I think that's going to be interesting, and that's going to be kind of good for them too. Is again, when you're going to have a roster that's going to be a lot of guys kind of experiencing things like this for the first time, the more kind of opportunities you have for a guy like him to work with those players, I think it's for the better. And I kind of like, something as important as the power play, also kind of taking ownership of that and, putting yourself out there a little bit on the line. I'm down with that. I think that's cool.
Yeah, and I like a head coach who's capable of doing that as well. I mean, it shows that they can be a good tactician. Real quick, this is from actually from our buddy Mike Benton, Derek Laxdal is having his introductory press conference for the Firebirds right now. This is going on as we're recording it, but we wanted to make sure this podcast got out and everything. But Mike Benton says that Laxdal says he's pledging to run a very similar system to the Kraken. He does acknowledge a small change from his previous stop in the OHL. So it sounds like they're going to try and have that, that match between the NHL and the AHL that I know they went for or at least tried for under Dan when he was there.
Yeah, but I think it'll be with it being so much more kind of set in stone, the transitional style, the north-south skating, the importance of skating, all that kind of stuff. I think I think that'll be a little bit more clear maybe, and it'll be something that's a little easier to follow. But it shows how much of a plan the organization has now, right? Like it is really top down. Again, we're going to talk about the draft here next. But it is clear that this is what their plan is for a long time, and I'm so happy to have that, Archie. We're not asking questions anymore. Like we know what the expectation is for systems. We know what the expectation is for players. We know what the expectation is for prospects developing, and the kinds of guys that the Kraken are going to target in future drafts and future free agencies and all that kind of stuff. It's really nice just to kind of have that. That not have to play the guessing game that we've been having to play the last year or so.
I mean, yeah, what's the one thing you were saying, especially at a lot of the post games toward the end of last season? The one thing you wanted to see for next season, whether it was Hakstol or somebody else, a plan. You wanted to see a plan and know what the plan was. And there's a plan. No guarantee of success, as with any plan, right? But there is a plan. And so that is really refreshing to see.
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm happy there is a plan. Secondly, it's kind of the plan I wanted. So I'm pretty happy.
What more can you ask for, right?
Exactly, yeah. Anything else on Coachella Valley and the hiring of Laxdal?
No, I don't think so. I don't see any other updates from the press conference here, but just, excited to see him get to work.
All right. So let's go ahead and move on and talk about the draft.
We've made people wait long enough, haven't we?
I know. I think everybody was excited to hear about that other stuff, though. We had so much fun being able to cover a draft for the first time in Vegas there, RJ. First off, Sphere, we haven't really talked about it with anybody yet. Amazing. Like, this was, I think, the smoothest NHL run event that we've ever been a part of. Everything went really, really well. The Sphere looked amazing by the time we were able to kind of go and see it in its full glory, which was for the last 4 picks of the draft, because we had to do all the media stuff kind of behind the scenes. But it looked incredible. I know from talking to several Kraken fans that were there, everybody had a good time. We had a great time on the back end of everything, covering things. The media setup that they had and everything was fantastic. The way the NHL did it, I thought. So that was all the kind of good stuff. As for the Kraken specific stuff, not to imply that the Kraken stuff.
I was going to say, Dylan, okay.
This is what I get.
Kraken stuff was good stuff too.
Speaking from the heart, right? Sometimes you gotta okay. The Kraken stuff was good too. And so I know we'll just kind of cut right to it, right? We had talked a lot about, and especially I had talked about the Kraken kind of needing defensemen kind of, maybe should be a priority for the prospect pool because there's not too many of them in the cupboard the way there is for forwards. And this draft was going to have defensemen. There were going to be some top draft eligible defensemen available for the Kraken picking at the 8th spot. And then, RJ, the draft gets underway. And oh my gosh, more of those defensemen are available at 8 than previously thought, as the Ducks throw everybody's draft plan out the window by taking Beckett Seneca, kind of started a run on forwards. Everybody had to go and get their guy. And the Kraken did that too, right? You had guys like Zeev Buyam on the board, Zane Parekh still on the board, Sam Dickinson on the board, Silayev on the board. Not going in those directions if you're the Kraken, right? Guys, I thought there was no chance of being on the board at 8. Instead, they go with Berkeley Catton, kind of from the backyard over there in Spokane, playing for the Chiefs, put up video game numbers there, right? On a bad team, too. I will throw that out there. He put up really good numbers without a ton of support around him. And at first, my reaction was okay. This is what we're
I don't think we were expecting it, right?
No,
certainly not.
expected. And then we went, and before we even got to talk to Berkeley Catton, we got Ron Francis. And he straight up told us in the media availability, a couple minutes after that pick was made, hey, a lot of outside noise about defensemen, people saying a defensive run was going to happen, which is, he almost said it word for word how I said it in my mock draft. So I think Ron watched that and he was throwing that directly at me. I'm going to choose to believe that anyway. And he said, but they had Catton kind of circled as their guy, and they were happy to get their guy. And now with the hindsight of free agency and the coaching hiring, it makes sense, because Berkeley Catton, what is he good at? He's so good off the transition. He's so good off the rush, right? He can play with speed. He can enter the zone with the puck. He'll then, he can go north-south, but then he's really good at not necessarily button hooking, but going east-west. He finds space. He holds onto the puck. He's got a great panic zone. It's really small. He holds onto the puck forever. He finds his open guys. His vision is elite. His head is always up. And it makes sense all of a sudden. It was like, oh, no, this was part of the plan. And this is why I was saying this organizational philosophy that the Kraken now have, I think, is a really long-term plan, because the guy that just took 8th overall fits in perfectly with it and the kind of style that they want to go with.
Right. And it was hard to see that because it would fit in with so many things that would happen later. Yes. That we didn't know or see. But of course, as the organization's planning for all of that, they know it, they see the plan, and it makes sense. And so, yeah, it was definitely a surprise, especially with all those defensemen on the board. 4 of them go immediately after Berkeley Catton, then the run on D kind of starts. But I do not mind this pick at all. And I was thinking, even in the moment, right? I've talked about it in the past when it comes to past drafts, and even arguing with you a lot about certain prospects, right? That I felt like the upside wasn't as high as I would like. Mm-hmm. If you are picking in the top 10, you have to go for upside. You absolutely have to go for upside. That is my philosophy on the draft. And I don't think you can argue that the Kraken didn't go for upside here. Berkeley Catton has amazing upside. I mean, I go back to a tweet from Cam Robinson that I think was one of the first things I looked at after this pick was made, because then it was making the rounds. Here's a list of every CHL draft eligible skater to produce 50 plus goals and 115 plus points in the 21st century. Sidney Crosby, Patrick Kane, Connor Bedard, Berkeley Catton. That's it. And so he says, fade Catton at your own peril. The scoring is special. These are numbers that we just do not see from most players. And so, scoring at the CHL level, still pretty solid indicator of NHL performance, especially on the high end. So I have no issue with it. Size is a bit of a concern. I mean, that is really one of the reasons. Look, if he's 6'2", he goes in the top 5, no question, maybe top 3. Yeah. So there's no question on that. Size is a bit of a concern, but when you look at the player, the smarts, everything he brings, I have no problem with going over one of these defensemen who, and I think you were saying too, as we were getting close to the draft, because we were both in Vegas, we had time to talk a lot about these prospects, and I tend to defer to you on these things, but we chatted a lot about it. And you were telling me that for every one of these defensemen, there were question marks in your mind, except maybe Levshunov, which I think is just solid, but he goes second overall. Right. But for all the other defensemen, each one of them had their own flaw, right?
Yeah, and I was calling them fatal flaws too. And I do think that maybe some of the teams picking in the top 10 kind of came around to the same conclusion the more and more you watch them. I mean, just to go down the list, right? Zane Parekh, the thing would be strength for me, right? His defensive game isn't even that bad for a guy who's so offensively heavy. It's just that he doesn't have the strength, and I don't know that he'll be able to add the strength to necessarily always be able to do what he needs to do defensively. So there was the question mark there. With Sam Dickinson, it's that, he was really good overall. I really liked him. He's still the one that I would have, said at 8, you go with if you're going defenseman, but maybe lacks some of the high-end upside, right? Like that kind of special potential that you're talking about drafting in the top 10. Maybe Sam Dickinson just doesn't have that. With Salayev, questions. He has no offensive game. He's never going to have offensive game. That's just not going to be a part of his game. But also, the news kind of came out late in the thing about like his contract status, and it's going to be a while probably or potentially before he's going to be able to come over to North America. So you have that situation going on. And then with Ziv Bouillon, all along we've been saying phenomenal game at the NCAA level. He plays a style that I have never seen before. Can it work at the NHL level? And I think that the draft kind of showed that general managers really a little worried about his ability to translate his game to the NHL level. And if he can't, what is he going to be? Right? Like, does he need to be able to go all the way into the offensive zone to be a special offensive player, or can he do that from just the blue line? And he didn't really answer that at Denver this season because he didn't need to. And so I think that's a reason he ended up being the last of the group taken, was just because that's a huge question to be gambling on if you are at the draft. So going through all of those defensemen afterwards, after the Berkeley Catton pick, it made sense. I could see Ron and his assistant general managers, the scouting staff, everybody having those exact same questions, and then looking at Berkeley Catton and saying, well, the only question is size. And we've seen in the past in the NHL, if you can play, you can get past that size barrier. And so he's the one whose question was answerable. And I think that makes it, kind of the safer road to go down, and in some cases, the better road to go down too.
Right. And that's well said. This question was answerable. And I think it's something you've seen the Kraken have not been scared of in the past, is drafting players who they can play, but they're a little bit on the smaller side. And especially when his junior production is what it is, I think it's a bet that you can feel pretty good about making over any one of those defensemen. And especially too, the positional value as well. Ron Francis talked about how it was important for them to get centers. And we could talk about this with Catton a little bit later. I know you have some reservations about whether or not he'll stay a center, but that was something that Ron Francis emphasized right afterward was drafting a center. He said that was important for us and what we were looking to get. And he mentioned Rykov and Goyette moving to the wing as part of the reason why. But he was looking at the prospect pool and felt that center was an area that they wanted to go.
Yeah. And, look, centers are valuable. We've talked about this in the past, right? Like the number one thing you can have, like the best thing you can have to build around franchise-wise is a franchise center, right?
It's the most valuable position.
Look at every team that wins the Stanley Cup. We've done this in the past, and you just run down. They all had an elite centerman. Like, that is the constant for every Stanley Cup champion. You look at the two teams in this year's Stanley Cup final with Sasha Barkov on the Florida side. Connor McDavid obviously speaks for himself on the other side, but they are elite defensemen. They are top 5 at that position kind of guys. You look at Jack Eichel the previous year with Vegas, again, kind of top 5 guy. It's just something you need. So having more centers in the organization is definitely not a bad thing, even if, it looks kind of ridiculous when you go to like an armchair GM style thing and it's just this never-ending list of centers. But I really don't hate it. I think if you're going to overdraft one position, center's probably the way to go.
Yeah, and also it's worth mentioning that it's just about everybody is drafted as a center. So many young forwards are drafted as centers because they're usually the best player on their junior team, and that is the most important position. And so you're kind of moved to center, and as your career progresses, a lot of them tend to get bumped over to wing. Like you said, Carson Rykov, David Goyette. Those are wingers now, but they were drafted as centers, and that's just kind of how it goes in players' careers. So often drafting a center means you're just drafting a forward.
Yes, exactly. And we'll see if that ends up being the case with Berkeley Catton as well, or what ends up happening there. The other benefits of drafting centers is, hey, look, you need centers down the lineup. They become important for your third and fourth lines as well. And so if you can have young guys capable of performing those roles, kind of the difficult challenges that being a bottom 6 center requires of you, and you can have those guys in the system where they can play on ELCs, stuff like that, that's another great thing to have if you're an NHL organization. Should we talk about the drafted guys and their performance at Dev Camp, like as we go through the draft, or should we save all Dev Camp stuff for later, you think?
I think we should let's talk about the drafted guys, and then we can throw in their performance from Dev Camp, and we just kind of go through the different draft picks and kind of then what we saw. I think that probably is the cleanest way to do it.
Yeah. So with Berkeley Catton, then, I mean, the number one thing that stands out to me, and this is something that, I mean, if anybody has watched one of my prospect chats, when I've like live watched video with anybody, it's the importance of kind of keeping your head up and your ability to scan the ice, have that vision. find plays to make. And that's the thing that really stood out to me with Berkeley Catton at Dev Camp, was that his head is always up. He's never looking down. He's always scanning the ice. He's always looking for a teammate to see where guys are. He's always scanning the defense. And he did it in a way that I've never seen, a prospect at any of these dev camps. I've been there for everyone the Kraken have had. Nobody else has ever played like that before, right? Matty Beniers didn't play like that at dev camp. Shane Wright didn't play like that at dev camp. Berkeley Catton has a really special ability to, as he's coming in with speed, just have his head up, see the gaps, seize the gaps, find his open, an open player to pass the puck to, and then thread the needle and get it there. And that's the other big thing that I thought separated him from everybody else that we've ever seen at a Kraken development camp, with just the passes he was even trying. Like, he goes for it. Like, he thinks he can do anything. And here's the thing, he can. Like, we saw him make passes that we've never seen. I said to you, I've never seen a player in a Kraken sweater make a pass like that before.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that play where Catton dangles around a defender, and then I don't know how he sees Dragicevic on the other side, but then makes this backhand pass through the narrowest window in the other defender's skates and gets it through. And I remember I was taking video of that. I'm like, oh, this is the clip right here. And then immediately you turn to me and say, he tries things that I have not seen people in that sweater try before. And I think you were even referencing Kraken players,
yes,
NHLers, right? That he just tries things that are special. And so you could see, especially in that 3-on-3 scrimmage, just where the vision was, exactly, what he's trying to do out there. And it matches what he was talking about when we had the media availabilities with him in dev camp. The draft is always just, how excited it is to hear your name called, you got family here, all that stuff. But at dev camp, he was able to go a little bit more into his mindset and the way that he plays. And the first thing that he always mentions when talking about his game is his brain.
Yeah.
He said that's my number one asset, right? My brain. And that's the thing that's going to translate, is that I can use my brain to figure out these plays, to try some things. And thankfully my skills kind of match up with that and go to that level. And that's not always the case with a lot of players, but that's the area he emphasizes always, is his brain and his smarts. And you've said this in the past to me when talking about prospects generally, not even just talking about Catton, but you always say it's all about hockey IQ, right? That's what separates the great from the good. At this level, a lot of players have high-end skill, but how many of them can think fast enough to play with it and put it all together? And I think you're seeing it all come together with Berkeley Catton.
Exactly. And that's intriguing, because, we talked all off season, or really all end of season, and then through the beginning parts of the off season for the Kraken, about what do the Kraken need to add? They need to add an offensive superstar, somebody who has that ability. Berkeley Catton has the potential to have that ability, where he could be a superstar offensive piece, where he could put up that production that, the Kraken have just never had, really. And I think that's really, really intriguing. That's really, really fun. It's exciting. The size thing is real. I mean, he looked basically like the only guy he was bigger than was Jagger Firkus, which is not saying much, right? From a hockey player standpoint. So that is going to be a challenge for him as he progresses along his NHL journey. I don't think he's going to be, playing for the Kraken this year. Obviously, a lot of guys probably that we're going to talk about at Dev Camp are not going to, just because of how stacked the Kraken roster still is. But he's going to be ready, I think, sooner rather than later. And I don't think he's going to need a stop in Coachella Valley necessarily along the way, just because of his brain and how good he is with it. I also just, talking about the press conferences, both at the draft and then at Dev Camp, the confidence he has, man, it's so nice, because it's like the perfect level of, hey, I'm confident, I speak well, I'm telling you exactly what I'm good at because I am good at it, but it doesn't get into like too cocky, full of himself territory at all. Like he really, really surprised me in that way, because you just don't hear hockey players speak confidently about themselves without it, the few that do, it tends to kind of fall into that, like, I'm the best thing ever territory. And it really didn't with him.
Right. I think the humility shines through as much as he is confident and comfortable. And we saw it from that very first media availability right after he was selected, giving great answers, being super comfortable with us, even with Marshawn Lynch staring over his shoulder, right? At the various media people asking questions. I know he's not the biggest fan of us. Marshawn, that is, not Berkeley Catton.
Yes.
But I mean, so it was great seeing him just super comfortable in that moment. And I think that's going to bode well for him in the future.
Yeah. How about all that stuff at the draft too? The social media team putting it out, like it's Berkeley Cat and Marshawn basically just wandering around the draft. Like they're just
let them loose on the draft floor. Yeah.
What's crazy is all of the other teams posting videos of Marshawn, and then Berkeley Cat would just be standing there, but of Marshawn interacting with their top drafted prospect. Like he was learning Russian with Salayev. He was hanging out and learning how to fight hockey style with Tija Ginla. Like it was just like every team, it seemed like, was able to put out a video of their prospect interacting with Marshawn Lynch, and I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, no, that was great content. I mean, just a content factory right there. And I love Marshawn Lynch showing up, right? Part owner of the Kraken, showing up to the draft, showing the prospects around. That was pretty cool to see. I was not expecting it. As we got up to the podium, I'm thinking, all right, first round pick, here we go, questions. And then I see Marshawn Lynch just looking over at me, and he was given a look to all basically every reporter who asked a question. He's like, really? What a dumb question. But everybody. So I'd love him stay. I mean, I was gonna say staying in character. It's just him. That's who he is.
Yeah. Being the character that is Marshawn Lynch. In the second round, the Kraken had 2 second-round picks. Look, there were some defensemen, I'm not gonna lie, that fell late into the first round. And I was kind of thinking like, hey, Kraken, you got a couple second rounders, maybe move up and take one of these guys. EJ Emery would have been the one I would have really liked them to target there. But they end up staying pat. And in the second round, they made both of their selections. First one being, is it Mietman? Am I saying
it
right?
Julius Mietman.
Yep. Mietman. Yep. Of the Everett Silvertips. I know a lot of Silvertips fans that are also Kraken fans are very, very happy about that selection. We can talk about him. As much as the first round, we kind of said, right, was them taking the guy who had the easier to answer question in Berkeley Catton. Felt like the second round, they played it a little safe, the Kraken, right? In Mietman, they're getting a big centerman, a big forward who is going to be able to play with size, who has a very high floor, but maybe lacks some on the ceiling side of things from a skill or offensive production standpoint, but is one of those guys that I was just talking about, right? The importance of having depth centerman. He screams NHL, depth forward here to me, and probably at center too.
Right. He's someone I think will translate as a center, and that's certainly how he views himself in his game. And the people in Everett know him very well. I mean, we've asked our friends who go see more Everett games than we do about him. And the first thing they say, and actually it's the first thing Ron Francis said, because he was asked, what did you like about Miet? And he said, well, he's a big boy. And he certainly is at 6'3". He goes to the net, he grinds, he bangs away at the net front. I mean, that's something that we identified as a need. I mean, Mietnin's a little ways away, of course, as is anybody that you're drafting here. But as a need for the Kraken last season, where they just didn't have enough guys that went to the net, Mietnin certainly is not afraid of that at all. 6'3" Finnish center. He says he models his game after Alexander Barkov. I can't pick a better Finnish center to model your game after. Don't know that he has that upside of Barkov, of course, but still good that he's thinking that way. And yeah, he was also pretty comfortable with the media too. His English is very good. And he was, I asked him about playing against Berkeley Catton, and he said Catton was probably the hardest guy that he had to play against this year. So, had some good things to say about the Kraken's first round pick as well. But that's right. They have 2 players that are more or less in their backyard. And I asked Jeff Tambolini, head of player development, about that too. And he said that's really good for the development staff as well. Having them so close also helps cut down on the travel budget a little bit too, in helping those guys out.
Yeah, definitely. Watching him at dev camp, because I was like, it's easy to get a good look at him there. The size obviously stands out. The strength he plays with too, like he's, like all of these guys at, 17, 18 years old, they're going to put on more muscle as they get older, right? Like they just kind of finished growing into what they're going to be. And then now comes the adding of mass, right? And he's got a frame that's going to support more weight. His playing weight should be pretty high, but already just the strength he plays with. He really understands leverage concepts, how to utilize his strength, when to engage with somebody, with a defender physically, when, based on where they're skating, how they're standing. So he understands, when they're going to be not at their best balance wise, so that he can more easily win that matchup. He really displayed a lot of the things at Dev Camp that you would look for a guy who's going to go net front, who's going to use his size. It's one thing to have that size. It's another thing to understand how to use it. And what really impressed me was he already has a very good understanding of how to use his size and strength to do what he wants to do out there. And as you said, that's go to the net. And that's always going to be a good thing in my mind.
Yeah, and in a Dev Camp setting too, you can see that, especially around some of the younger players, but some even that are a little bit older than him, being able to use that size against some more experienced players.
Yeah. And that is one of the important things to remember about Dev Camp, is that you had guys like as old as 21 competing against guys as young as 17.
You kind of have to grade on a curve, I think, for everybody who's younger like that.
You do. That is one of the tougher things about camp there. Their other second round pick was Nathan Villeneuve, coming out of the OHL with the Sudbury Wolves. This pick caught me by surprise a little bit. One, because he was a player who was suspended earlier this season in the OHL, and I tend not to think of the Kraken as going after guys that have had issues, and his suspension was for bounty stuff. Like, it wasn't like, got into a fight past his fight limit in the major juniors or something. It was something that was pretty serious there. Ron talked about it though, and he said that they did a lot of work on it. They felt like it was not going to be an issue moving forward. It was still just a little bit surprising to see them go in that direction. And then on the flip side, just from a play on ice standpoint, RJ, I look at him and I go, this is just Jacob Melanson 2.0, where it's just you're going out there and you're finding a kid who wants to go out there, grind, piss people off, and kind of play that way, maybe instead of playing the skill game so much.
Yeah, that is absolutely the book on Nathan Villeneuve. The NHL Network panel said right after he was drafted, he's a pain. He will trash talk. He will run you over. He'll score goals and rub it in your face. So he's definitely that kind of player. Also, looking at him too, he had that hockey smile with the tooth missing and everything. I heard he blocked a shot with his face in the playoffs. So, he is definitely that kind of player. And he said, I'm a playoff player. Like, that is where he makes a difference, is in the playoffs and getting under people's skin. As far as the production, I think the upside is kind of limited, right? The floor is maybe a little bit higher, but the ceiling is certainly more limited. This is not a guy who's going to play in your top six, but you're hoping that he can be an effective bottom six pest. And the Kraken really haven't had anybody that plays like that. I guess maybe Yanni Gourde would be the closest, but he's I don't know, he's smiling and laughing the whole time. I don't know. Villeneuve seems like an actual proper pest, right? Someone who's actually going to piss off the other team. And so, I think those kind of players can help you win in the playoffs. Like, if he does turn into, what he can turn into and be an asset at the NHL level and still provide that edge, that can help you when you get into playoff games. But in the second round, you are passing up on some players with maybe a little bit more upside in favor of that edge and that grit.
Yes. And that's the only questionable part for me, is I feel like you can find guys, if you just want a guy who's going to maybe play that way, you can find them later in the draft, I feel like, right? Or you can develop one along the way, right? You have a more skilled player who maybe is just always on the outside looking in. How many of those guys have we seen turn into that player, RJ? Because that's their pathway to the NHL, right?
Yep.
So I felt like using a second round pick on it, again, maybe, it's not what I would have done, but I'm not gonna question Ron too much on this one. It was the direction he needed to go. Wasn't able to participate first day of training camp, of Dev Camp, just because his equipment got delayed in getting to Seattle. But once we were able to see him, that's basically what we saw. It wasn't always it wasn't a playoff atmosphere, let's say. So I don't know that we got to see him at his best then, according to him. But 3-on-3 stuff, those kinds of players never do too well in that just because there's so much time and space out there and everything. Thought at the 5-on-5 on Friday, though, he played a little bit better just because it is a little bit more about clearing guys out to make room for your skill guys. If you're playing, on the wing the way he was in a situation like that, and he was good at accomplishing that.
Right. I mean, the dev camp setting is not the time and place to show what he is best at, and so there's only so much you can see. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, you take all the pest stuff out, and the real goal is just to be good enough to play at the NHL level, to the point where you are not a liability on the ice for your team. Yes. And if you can do that, then you've successfully played that role. Right. I think that's the kind of the line that you guys like, Ryan Reeves or a Matt Rempe or whatever. You just have to be good enough to hang at the NHL level and not be a liability to your team, and then you're an asset. Right. As unless you're like a Curtis McDermott is probably on the other side of that line, where whenever he's out there, like, you are getting caved in, he is not helping you as far as like moving the puck to where it needs to go or anything like that. It is a weakness. Just be on the right side of that line. That's all that Villeneuve has to do. And then he can be an asset to the team. Exactly.
Into the third round, with their first pick in the third round, because they also had 2 third-round picks this year. The Kraken selected a defenseman, so they did end up getting one. Alexis Bernier, coming out of the QMJHL. Watching him at Dev Camp, because I only have time to really kind of go over the guys that are going to be borderline first-round picks and stuff. He's a little bit further down, so really Dev Camp was the first time that I was able to get to see him too much. And he looked pretty good, right? He looked like a pretty solid all-around defenseman. He could move the puck really well. I liked his passing a lot. I liked his vision, particularly from the center of the point, right? Like kind of mid-ice there. I thought he had really good vision from that spot. He was able to kind of hit guys, do no-look passes, look off defenders, that kind of stuff. I like that aspect of things. His skating's really solid, especially skating backwards. I like that he likes to use his stick when defending. He just kind of seemed like an all-around, good defenseman coming in for his first dev camp, and that's really all you want out of a guy like him. Drafted in the third round, 18 years old. It's going to be a while kind of situation, but I thought he made a good impression for his first dev camp.
Right. He's smooth. He's not flashy, but I didn't notice him a whole lot, but sometimes with defensemen, that's a good thing. You don't want to be, especially as an 18-year-old coming in, you don't want to be noticed a lot in dev camp. That usually means that you're getting walked around, that other players are taking advantage of you being younger there. So again, just solid, smooth player. And, we'll see how he develops. And, hopefully I think probably the upside, is second pair and more realistically, maybe third pair if he turns out.
Yeah, I would say so. And just another note on him. I know Jeff Baker, I was talking with Jeff Baker at the Seattle Times about a story he was working on. He was going to go do a one-on-one with him. I don't know if this story has come out yet.
It's already come out. Yes, it has.
Okay, yeah. But his dad, Alexis Bernier's dad, who's a former player, is now known, I believe, as the Poultry King of Quebec, and owns like a rotisserie chicken place. Like he runs a bunch of franchises and owns this company that has a bunch of rotisserie chicken places all around Quebec. So that's kind of just like a fun little tidbit and thing to know about the latest Kraken drafted defenseman there. Later on in the third round, the Kraken selected, RJ, stop me if you've heard this before, a large Finnish goaltender.
Yeah, I got to stop you here. I think I have heard this one before. The Kraken certainly have a type in net with their draft picks. They love their big Finnish goalies, whether it's Kim Saarinen this year, Vesa Vedenpää last year, or Nicholas Kokko the year before. That's 3 drafts, 3 big Finnish goalies. And it's no coincidence. They have the scouting staff that identifies these players. And so there was a lot of talk about Sasu Hovi, who is their Finnish area scout, but he's also a former goalie. And so he knows Finland, he knows the goalies. And so the Kraken take advantage of that. And so they draft the goalies that he identifies. And actually, we ran into him before going into the draft. We were both kind of in line to get into the Sphere. And he seemed pretty happy. I don't know. He seemed in a good mood. So maybe knowing that they might draft one of his Finnish goalies. So credit to him for finding those guys.
seemed happier than any of us having to walk in the suit out in that heat. So
Yeah, unfazed by the heat. And I even joked to them like, this is a little different than what you see in Finland. He's like, oh yeah, no, you don't get this kind of heat in Finland.
Yes.
So yeah, unfazed by it. Maybe we should have should have seen that as a sign or something that they were gonna draft. I mean, they drafted a couple of Finns.
I was gonna say if we do it next year, we just got to ask him which goalie is it this year. Which one you get with?
Who's the goalie? We won't tell anybody. Just who's the goalie
ahead of time, just so we know. But yeah, that was a lot of fun because we were also we were walked over to the Sphere basically with him. We were all trying to figure out how to get there while staying inside as long as possible, and out of that 110-degree heat that day. It was fun. Goalies, though, I mean, like we talked about it in the past, it's like magic. I don't understand the magic. That's for other people. But big Finnish goaltender. I mean, going back in the day, just talking with you, RJ, right? Like that's the dream, is basically just to amass as many of those as possible because one of them's going to hit, and then you're set for a long time.
Yeah, Finland is a goalie factory. Just pick one, pick a big one. That's the only other thing is I'd say go for size. I can't really understand it, but I saw he was listed even on HockeyDB as 6'2", elite prospect 6'4". He's growing. Like he is bigger than he was even a year ago, it seems. So yeah, pick a big Finnish goalie and just hope.
Yep. I don't know that we'll talk too much about the kind of the rest of the draft here for the Kraken because we're already an hour 10 into the podcast.
I know.
All the other prospects at Dev Camp. And, we got through the third round. We got through, 5 picks for the Kraken there. The rest of the draft, though, it's the standard affair of you're throwing darts at a dartboard once you get out of the third round especially. Right, you could argue the whole draft is that way, but certainly once you get past the third round, it's a lot of that kind of stuff. And the players drafted aren't making too big an impact in their first Dev Camp, just for obvious reasons. So I don't know that we need to go through everybody in as much detail as we did. Switching over to the prospects that were coming back and joining Dev Camp. First off, I had talked about, I think on a prospect chat before, I don't know that I had done it on a podcast, that I thought a lot of the Coachella Valley guys weren't going to probably be there. Ryan Winterton didn't really need to be there. He's showing what he can do in Coachella Valley. Shane Wright earned a break for sure, right? Guys like that. Yanni Newman was not at Dev Camp, didn't really need to be there. So a lot of those kinds of guys didn't end up going to Dev Camp this year. It was the first year without them for some of them. And but that being said, there's still lots of great guys to talk about here. RJ, player who I thought had the best camp, and I was telling everybody this at the meetup after Dev Camp was over, was David Goyette. I think he's the one that most looked ready for something more. When he was on, and he was capable of kind of doing whatever he wanted out there. I put that he's the smoothest out there. He doesn't have the best shot or the best skating, but he's the smoothest and most ready for more. Defensively, he puck watches. I'm not gonna say he doesn't, but a lot of times he's in a good spot to do it, right? Like he knows how to clog up the slot, kind of sit in a passing lane. If you're gonna puck watch, that's the way to do it, I guess. I'll give him that. But it was obvious that David Goyette is ready for Coachella Valley, and he is ready to kind of go out there and prove what he's got, because I thought he was by far and away the best player there.
Definitely. I mean, it was man amongst boys there. It seemed like he's only 20, and so the age difference isn't on paper as pronounced, but it looked that way on the ice. So he's ready for more. And he was also pretty pumped to see that his fellow OHL teammate Nathan Villeneuve got drafted, because they were teammates in Sudbury, and so they know each other. And I think it was good. I think he helped Villeneuve kind of ease into camp and everything too.
Yeah, exactly. I guess from best player, let's go to best defenseman. And for me, that was Ty Nelson. Big surprise, right? Kind of always ends up with the best defenseman. I thought Caden Price gave him a run for his money this year, though. And we talked with Caden Price, and he was feeling good, felt healthy for the first time, kind of coming into a Dev Camp with the Kraken, and that was really important for him. Felt healthy all through last year, and that was important. But I still thought Ty Nelson, he just shines in these situations. Especially in the scrimmages and stuff. He's so smart with his body positioning. His skating is good, but it's not great. I still think that well, that and his size obviously are going to be the two things that are going to limit him the most as he tries to get to the NHL level. But his positioning is really, really solid. He really understands his limitations skating wise, and he knows that he needs to be proactive in working around them as far as positioning his body and using his stick to disrupt what the other team is doing. And that was, I think, the most impressive thing for me was just his stick work, not controlling the puck, just his ability to disrupt the other team with his stick, whether it was getting in a passing lane or just poke checking it away. He's so good at using his kind of more stocky build, his strength to tie somebody up, and then just with one hand on his stick, again, use his strength to force that puck out and away from them. It's really, really impressive. And I do think that is a skill that can play all the way up to the NHL level.
Mm-hmm. And he looked, I think, more mature this year than in previous years. That was something we noticed right away, was in his game, and also just, his build, everything. He looks more ready. And I think this is the time to make the jump to the AHL, which is what he's going to be doing. And yeah, that stocky build, it's going to translate everywhere. I know people worried about his height maybe on draft day, but if you just look, he's built like a fire hydrant. Shouldn't have any problem with that. I mean, my one question is maybe his agility a little bit, kind of turning with moving forwards. But, I think that's the kind of thing that you do work with an AHL coaching staff on, and you kind of get used to the speed. And by the end of your first season, should be able to have that down.
Yeah, and like I said, he kind of took away some of that more roaming, playing like his hair's on fire, which it kind of is with the red curls. He lost some of that from previous dev camps and even from his OHL playing in this dev camp. But I think that was because he was trying to be more proactive about his defensive positioning, kind of show Ron Francis, show the other assistant general managers, show Tambellini, show everybody in the Kraken organization that, hey, I understand my limitations. I'm working with them, and I'm want to improve, and I want to be the best player that I can be. And that's what you always want to. That's what you want to see anyway. Just because I already mentioned it, we could talk about Caden Price. Caden Price looked fantastic to me. He was so physical, RJ. Because I don't think of Caden Price as a physical player. Watching him with Kelowna this past season, but he was very physical in camp, and it kind of fit right in with what camp was this year, which was competition, right? It was basically just nonstop competition. It was like half an hour of drills the first day, and then it was one-on-one battles. And then day 2 was 3-on-3 scrimmage. And then day 5 is obviously the full scrimmage. The name of the game this year was competition, and Caden Price showed up ready for that.
Yeah, he had, in my opinion, a top 3 highlight for all of dev camp. And it was in a one-on-one drill where he just flattened Viking Gustafsson. By the way, 6'6" Viking Gustafsson in one of those drills. We didn't see another hit like that for all of dev camp. I mean, that was just, and it got everybody. Yeah, there was like a collective gasp from everybody. It got them out of their seats. So, I mean, he was able to bring that, and yeah, the physicality, and also there were some moments offensively too, where he shined and had a couple plays where he jumped in, like in the 3-on-3 scrimmage, and was able to score too. Looked really well rounded. I mean, you had been singing his praises to me last season, right? And telling me I think he might be the best Kraken D prospect. You mentioned that on your prospect chats. I agree with you now at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he's up there with Ty Nelson. It's really, he was really, really impressive. The vision he had, the passes that he was making, his reads for when to jump up into a play, like that was really impressive. And he did that on more than one occasion. You could tell he was confident. He felt good, particularly in the 3-on-3, but even on the 5-on-5 scrimmage, he felt very comfortable and confident with his decision making. And as a defenseman, particularly one who, has power play time and is kind of more so on the offensive side of things, but this really matters for defense too, to have that confidence in your reads, trust your reads, and then on top of it, have good reads to begin with. I thought was really, really impressive, because that's just not something you get from a lot of young defensemen. And with talking with him, you could tell that confidence was kind of coming across, because like he said, and I'll bring it up again just because he brought it up, I think 3 times in our brief little interview with him, just felt healthy. He just feels good. He feels healthy. He's ready to go. And he kind of used that all season long. And we saw the result with Kelowna. And then I think the same thing happened here at Dev Camp. He's just ready to go. He's feeling confident, and, look out, everybody, basically.
Yeah, it makes all the difference. Anybody else stand out to you in Dev Camp that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys. I'll start going a little quicker here. I guess just to round out the defensemen, Jugnoth, I thought had a really good camp. I know he impressed a lot of people, particularly on the offensive side of things. I still think his overall game needs some work, but he looks really good. And again, talking about jumping up into plays, knowing when to make that read, when to trust yourself, when to skate up and make that play, he's got it in spades. We saw that with him with the Winterhawks and transitioning from the NCAA to the WHL this past season. He's definitely got that. So I thought he had a really good camp as well on the defensive side of things. Going back over to the forwards, I mean, Chalet came in. The skill is so evident with him. I still think he has the best puck skills of anyone the Kraken have ever drafted. Just when the puck is on his stick, the things he can do with it are so impressive. His ability to make those things look smooth is so impressive. Like, I love all those aspects about it. 5-on-5 scrimmage kind of disappears on the back checking side of things. But you know what? I kind of felt like a lot of guys did in that 5-on-5 scrimmage. Didn't feel like back checking was necessarily the most emphasized thing. So I'll cut him some slack there.
Yeah, I think when you see 10 plus goals scored in a little 2-period 5-on-5 scrimmage, guys aren't playing in their full game setting. But I think one thing worth mentioning on Chalet too was we did get the chance to talk to him after day one of dev camp, and he wasn't shy about it. Last year, we asked him how last year was going, and I think he used the word rough maybe 10 times. Just talking about how difficult things were last year and that transition of moving over to North America from Czechia, not really speaking the language, not even really knowing anybody in the city who does, and just that adjustment. He said things got better when he had the trade to Kitchener and kind of got used to his new surroundings. But I think you just have to look at that and take that into account when looking at how last year went for him, and hopefully this year will be a little easier on him.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful, and I think it should be. So I'm excited about that. We could talk about his, Kitchener Ranger teammate in Carson Rykhoff, who looked huge. I mean, he clearly grew from last dev camp to this one. He looked big. He's going to need to fill out his new frame. But what impressed me about his frame was like his hips and stuff. Like, he's going to be able to carry a strong lower body as he continues to add mass. And I think that's going to be really important for a guy who is taller. You're going to need that strong lower body because, other guys might have leverage on you. So I like that from Rykhoff. Obviously the skill stuff is there. His shot is light years better than it was last year. Because remember, he was drafted, and a lot of the stuff he did coming in, through his draft year he was kind of more of a defensive center. He used his long reach to defend well. He was very focused on back checking, all that kind of stuff. And then this year in his D+1, he really opened up offensively with Kitchener, and that was kind of the role that they asked him to play. And the Kraken did a great job of seeing that before it happened. And his shot is better than it was like when I was watching him even earlier this season, watching his Kitchener Ranger games. Like, it is so much better. His shot was really impressive. The puck skills through traffic need work, but just the reach he has, the lower body strength he's going to have, the shot he's developing, he's really good. I think the future is very, very bright for Razor. Molgaard, speaking of reach, I mean, Oscar Fisker Molgaard continues to be Oscar Fisker Molgaard, which is just like going to be one of the most fun forechecking and back checking guys out there at any given time. Again, kind of a long body, not necessarily the tallest, but the longest, I would say. And he knows how to use that long reach he has really, really well. He uses his stick so well to disrupt things. And then what I thought was impressive with him was he really worked on his puck skills over this past season. You can tell that he had some good coaching over there in the Swedish Hockey League where he was playing, and he worked on his puck skills, especially in tight. He made a couple plays both in the 3-on-3 scrimmage and the 5-on-5 scrimmage in tight around the net, where he was able to kind of dig the puck out of a battle and then just go ahead and like throw it top shelf. And I was like, oh, I did not know you could do that. You haven't shown that.
I was not familiar with your game.
No. And so I really like that like kind of added ability that Oscar Fisker Molgaard kind of threw in. The other thing is he's so fast in a straight line, RJ. Like, I bet if you were to have everybody race, I think he could win that race if they're going in a straight line for a couple rinks. Like he would really start pulling away from everybody. Needs to work on keeping that speed and momentum when having to transition to a more east-west role, because the edge work was a little rough. We'll say that. But I think the rest of it is all really, really good stuff. And that reach and the instincts he has, I mean, I just know he's going to be a menace when forechecking in the future, and then the back checking through the neutral zone. He's going to give teams fits. I still very much believe he's going to end up an NHL player with the Kraken. They also signed him to his entry-level contract too, so congrats to him on that. Let's see. I want to save Firkus for last. I'm just going through, making sure I kind of touched on everybody. Tucker Robertson, my boy, looked so ready for CV. You could tell that he wasn't able to get a ton of playing time with them this year. Kind of bounced back and forth between them and the Mavericks, but he was definitely ready for it. I mean, a couple things I guess I didn't mention with Catton. I talked about his small panic zone, but also he's really good at keeping the puck out away from his body for a lot of stuff, which just opens up the plays he's able to make. But when he is having to go through traffic, he's really good in tight too. I like that from Berkeley Catton a lot, and his ability to make those adjustments. He's really good at also, we talked about him being a smaller player, and this can maybe transition over into talking then about Jagger Firkus. But as a smaller player, he's really good at making the adjustments he needs to make when defenders get in close and when contact is imminent. He makes the adjustments with his hips. He gets in a little low. He probably could still work on getting in a little lower, bending his knees a little bit more. But just the way that he keeps his body between the defender and the puck to protect the puck, make sure he holds on to it, make sure he's still able to make a play. Really, really impressive stuff. It's all the stuff that we've been talking about Jagger Firkus kind of needing to learn. And so I can kind of transition over into talking about Jagger Firkus here, where the first thing I put is just that Firkus is a baller. He is. Yeah. He's so gifted offensively. His shot is just unbelievable. It's so good. Every time I see it in person, it just takes my breath away.
He's so expanding his range. It feels like he's able to score from further and further away every year we see him.
I agree with that. He's really smart with his looks and where he kind of reads and sets up in the offensive zone. Again, though, that's always impressed me about his game, but it feels like he's able to do that with more movement now. It's not so much like, oh, I'm going to set up in this spot and then I'll just kind of park myself here. He's gotten a lot better at reading what his offensive teammates are doing and then knowing like, okay, the real prime scoring spot's going to be there, but I don't want to put myself there yet and have the defenseman start paying attention to me. So I'm going to kind of do some little circles over here. And then when it comes time for that play to be made, I'm going to make sure I'm there. And so that really impressed me with Firkus's game. I thought that's going to that will translate to Coachella Valley, which is where he's heading next in a big way. And it'll help him kind of keep some of the production he's had in junior at higher levels. It's obvious, though, that when things get more crowded, he struggles, right? 3-on-3 scrimmage, well, arguably the best player out there. 5-on-5 scrimmage disappears at times, right? Like things get a little bit more crowded. It's a little bit tougher. I wrote that he avoids board battles like the plague.
And you know what? I don't blame him for that at the moment because he doesn't win them.
No, he doesn't. I will give him this. He did a good job with the physical contact that he did get in this camp. He looked stronger in his lower body. He wasn't necessarily flattened the way that we've seen him in years past. He was able to just kind of bounce from those picks and get pushed instead of being, knocked down. That's definitely an improvement. We talked with him. He was one of the media availabilities we had. He's going to go hard at it this offseason, right? Like he knows that this transition from major junior to Coachella Valley is going to be big and he needs to be stronger. And so he knows that he's got to do that. I still just, I want to see him play like Catton in the way that he protects the puck, in the way that he prepares for contact, in all of those ways. Like I still want to see that from his game. We've talked at length about him not really, him choosing to go the video game numbers routes and trying to win, a championship in a Memorial Cup with Moose Jaw and how important that was for him. But and that's great. I'm not going to fault him for doing any of that. But the trade-off for that was that his development track was going to get longer because that was time that he could be using to work on these other things instead that he's going to have to work on. So this upcoming season with Coachella Valley, I don't know how great he's going to be out of the gates, just as he adjusts to the speed and the size of everybody. But like I said, there were elements of his game at Dev Camp that he has really worked on, and seeing that improvement year over year, that I thought, okay, no, he can still be like a 20 goal scorer in Coachella Valley year one, just because he's understanding offensive timing a lot better than he used to, where before he just relied on his stupid shot to kind of get away with whatever. He's understanding more advanced concepts that he's going to need to understand as a smaller player to succeed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, excuse me, now that becomes Derek Laxdal's project, right? I mean, that's a big part of his job as a developer now as a coach, is to kind of help Jagger Firkus on that new development track and see if he can kind of round out those areas of his game. And he might get a pretty darn good AHL player if he can help Firkus kind of figure out all that stuff.
Yeah. So it's going to be really intriguing to kind of watch him moving forward and everything. But again, he's got all the skill in the world. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He understands the task in front of him. The organization understands the task in front of him. That's all you can do at this point, right? And then we'll just kind of see how things develop as he gets to Coachella Valley there. But like I said, as always, I'm excited. And
Exactly.
and all of Dev Camp just means excitement in my mind. Like, it's just so great.
I know you love Dev Camp, and thank you for the wrap up on all the different players there. I tend to defer to you on these sorts of things. You're the great prospects guy, and I know you've got your prospect chat coming up at some point later this month. So if you're eager to hear more about that in more detail, you'll have an hour to talk about it, an hour plus with Dylan for those on the Patreon. So anything else on Dev Camp as we cross the hour and a half mark on this podcast? I knew we couldn't keep it under that. But anything else on Dev Camp before we kind of wrap up?
No, and look, we're going to have a long off season ahead of us, so there'll be more time to talk about all this stuff moving forward. But I think that's good for today.
All right, sounds good. So I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Deep Dive. Should I take us out here, Dylan?
Yeah, you can. Just make sure you talk about that pretzel bun again.
Of course. How could I forget? I can't forget the pretzel bun. Can't forget the burger of the month at Queen Anne Beer Hall for the new month. Of course, as I stumble on it, the pulled pork smash burger. Too much pressure, Dylan. See, this is why we have you and the podcast. But a big thanks to Queen Anne Beer Hall for sponsoring this deep dive, as they always do. And we will see you all next time.